They ought to make a film about the life of Paul. The events we have recently looked at in Acts are so full of escaping from plots of intrigue and murder, soldiers and rulers. Paul and his friends are now waiting for an audience with Felix, the Roman governor of the country, who wants Paul's accusers, the high priest Ananias, to come in person from Jerusalem. So let's have a look at our reading in Acts 24. 5 days later, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders and an attorney, a certain Tertullus, and they reported their case against Paul to the governor. When Paul had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, "Your Excellency, because of you we have long enjoyed peace, and reforms have been made for this people because of your foresight. We welcome this in every way and everywhere with utmost gratitude. But to detain you no further, I beg you to hear us briefly with your customary graciousness. We have in fact found this man a pestilent fellow, an agitator among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, and so we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to learn from him concerning everything of which we accuse him." The Jews also joined in the charge by asserting that all this was true. When the governor motioned to him to speak, Paul replied, "I cheerfully make my defence, knowing that for many years you have been a judge over this nation. As you can find out, it is not more than 12 days since I went up to worship in Jerusalem. They did not find me disputing with anyone in the temple or stirring up a crowd either in the synagogues or throughout the city. Neither can they prove to you the charge that they now bring against me. But this I admit to you, that according to the way which they call a sect, I worship the God of our ancestors, believing everything laid down according to the law or written in the prophets. I have a hope in God, a hope that they themselves also accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous. Therefore, I do my best always to have a clear conscience towards God and all people. Now after some years I came to bring alms to my nation and to offer sacrifices. While I was doing this, they found me in the temple completing the rite of purification, without any crowd or disturbance. But there were some Jews from Asia. They ought to be here before you to make an accusation, if they have anything against me. Or let these men here tell what crime they had found when I stood before the council, unless it was this one sentence that I called out while standing before them: it is about the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you today." But Felix, who was rather well informed about the way, adjourned the hearing with the comment, "When Lysias the tribune comes down, I will decide your case." Then he ordered the centurion to keep him in custody, but to let him have some liberty, and not to prevent any of his friends from taking care of his needs. Here our reading ends. Thanks be to God. So Paul gets out from the obviously false accusations against him by pressing on a sore spot, the division between Pharisees and Sadducees and their differing beliefs about the resurrection. And Paul had indeed been talking about the resurrection of Jesus. At this stage in the story of Acts, the driving force is the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem and their hatred of Paul. They are intensely annoyed that Paul, one of them, a Pharisee, should have turned and gone over to become a convert of Christ and be telling everyone in the Jewish area about this Jesus. Felix the governor was by all accounts a favourite of the Roman emperor of the time, Claudius, but Felix was a corrupt, callous man who had had a high priest murdered. But he was married to a Jewish daughter of Herod Agrippa called Drusilla. I wonder how much she influenced her husband in matters about the Jews. Felix asks for Paul's accusers to come down from Jerusalem in person to state their case, so the chief priest arrives with the Roman lawyer Tertullus to help. Tertullus downplays the religious dispute and puts the lawyer's spin on the case by saying that Paul is a public nuisance, a pestilent fellow, an agitator, or, as it might be put today, a terrorist and a subverter. Since Felix would not be interested in matters of belief in religion, Paul is accused on a matter of public order, or defiling the temple, which a Roman would understand as they had many temples to many gods. Paul, confident, assured, a Roman himself, brushes off the accusations as they have no proof, because it's a made-up charge. Yes, he admits he was in Jerusalem, but for only a few days, and had been bringing alms, money to the temple, for the temple. He admits he is a follower of the way, which fully accepts the Jewish law and prophets because they point to the Messiah, and Paul knows this is Jesus. Paul brings it back to the matter of the Pharisees and Sadducees and their difference in belief about the resurrection of the dead. Felix would not be able to judge on such religious matters, nor be particularly interested. It is indeed Jesus' resurrection that is at the heart of Paul's message everywhere, but Felix has a couple of motives of his own for stalling the proceedings under the guise of waiting for Lysias, who wrote the accusatory letter to Felix, waiting for Lysias to come in person. It seems Felix is actually interested in the fledgling Church of the Way and what it believes, and is quite glad to have Paul on hand to answer questions and to hear what Paul has to say. God had indeed told Paul that he would bear the good news to kings, and here he is with a chance to speak of Jesus to the Roman governor of the whole country. Also, Felix, having heard that Paul had brought money to the temple, might quite likely have had hoped for a bribe too, but that's in tomorrow's passage. So now let's have a closer look at the question of the resurrection that Paul raises here. The disagreement between the Sadducees and the Pharisees was about if there was a resurrection of the dead, as the Pharisees believed, or whether death is the end and that's it, as the Sadducees held. There's little or nothing in the Old Testament about what happens after death, just that the dead do not praise God and are silent. The same question about resurrection was the reason in Acts 4 that Peter and John had been arrested. And it was also the same question Jesus himself was asked by the Pharisees and the Sadducees in Matthew 24, in Mark 12, and in Luke 20. The Sadducees asked Jesus about resurrection, giving the puzzle that if there was a resurrection, then, if a man had been married 7 times, then in heaven, if there was a resurrection, in other words, which one would be his wife? Jesus' reply is interesting. He says they're wrong in assuming that implies there cannot be a resurrection for 2 reasons. First, they don't know the scriptures, the Old Testament, and second, they don't know the power of God. Both are needed to know the truth, the scriptures, and how powerful God is. In the Old Testament, though, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob were long dead when God had said, "I am the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob." He did not say, "I was the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob," but he says, "I am." And that means that the 3 patriarchs are living. So he is still their God. They are alive after death. That is Jesus' proof. Jesus goes on to say that after resurrection, there is no marriage because we are then like the angels. If today we ask the same question about a Christian man married 7 times, then are all 7 of his wives in heaven in the resurrection? Jesus says marriage is not important after resurrection. Now that sounds odd until we realise that heaven is the place where God is, with no barriers. We are in his presence, and God is love. Heaven is so filled with his presence, with love, that it will not matter about loving one person more than another. Love there is untainted, pure, full, and we know in that way too, when we are in heaven, we love in that way. We love and are loved equally by all in his presence. God has the power to raise everyone from the dead, and he will at the end of time, when all people are judged before his throne. All will be raised to account for their lives here on earth. That is the power of God, and we'll learn the truth about God in the scriptures, as well as with his power. So don't neglect the Old Testament, the Bible that Jesus read, for it contains much to teach us still. And each Sunday in church we say, "I believe in the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come." Paul says much more about why resurrection is important and about the resurrection of Jesus as the foundation of our faith in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And it really is well worth rereading that chapter again by yourself. So today we leave Paul under loose house arrest, but with his friends there too, able to visit and take care of food and his needs. In this part of Acts, Luke is journaling the events of Paul's arrest, as if it would be evidence in a court that would be needed later in Rome. So what happens next? That, like resurrection, is tomorrow's story.